All right, good afternoon and welcome to today's LAFCO. That's the Alameda County Local Agency Formation Commission. Today's date is Thursday, November 9th, and we are starting this meeting at 2:02 p.m. Could we start please with a roll call?
Chair Brown?
Here.
Commissioner Faria?
Here.
Commissioner Hobart?
Present.
Commissioner Hernandez?
Present.
Commissioner Johnson?
Here.
Commissioner Miley? Commissioner Splendorio?
Here.
Alternate Commissioner Marchand? Absent. Alternate Commissioner Tam? Absent.
She should be here.
I'm present.
Thank you.
None of the mics are on.
Alternate Commissioner Von Heater Leopold?
Here.
Alternate Commissioner Warner?
Here.
Let the record reflect, roll call has been taken, and we do have a quorum.
All right, thank you very much. Just for a matter of voting, so will Commissioner Tam be a voter that when
Yes.
Nate Miley not present? Okay, thank you very much. All right. Do we have any agenda amendments by staff?
Yes, Chair Brown, I would like to move agenda item number 7 after the consent calendar to make that number 5.
Thank you. And then for the record, 5 will become 6 and 6 will become 7. Any agenda amendments by members of the commission? Seeing none. All right, I'd like to open public comment. Public comment is from anyone from the audience that may address.
And excuse me, Chair Brown, I think we forgot the pledge, if we can just do that really quickly.
Let's do the Pledge of Allegiance. Please, everyone rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you for the correction. I absolutely did. Just zip right past that. All right, public comment. This is anyone from the audience may address the commission on matters not listed on the agenda within agenda item number 3 and that are also within the jurisdiction of Alameda County's LAFCO. Do we have any speaker cards?
No, we do not, Chair.
Okay, we'll close agenda item 3, the public comment period, and bring us to agenda item 4, which is consent A through E. Do we have any questions of staff for the consent calendar?
All of them are off.
Now we're on.
See the
Once you speak,
red
I
light
think they
comes
become
on
live.
when they're on.
It's on.
Chair, would you like a motion to approve?
If we have no questions, and do we have any comments from the public on agenda item 4, the consent?
I do not see any, Chair.
Okay, we'll close the public comment period. And yes, sir, I would love to have a motion if you choose.
Chair, I would, oh, go ahead.
County Regional Water and Waste Committee.
Commissioner Hobart, please turn on your mic real fast.
Not on?
So
Now it's on.
for the contract award for the countywide regional water and wastewater committee, this was a recommendation that came out of our municipal service review for countywide water, wastewater, stormwater, flood control services. And the commission recommended that we create a countywide regional water and wastewater committee to look at recycling water collaboration amongst all water and wastewater providers in the county.
We're actually forming a new committee.
It would be a report in a committee so that agencies can collaborate and understand exactly the gaps of why maybe some recycling water opportunities are not working, and then perhaps even for these agencies to get more funding to kind of understand what all the agencies are doing. to provide or figure out recycling and water reuse.
Could you remind me, in the review, did it talk about how many other counties have something similar to this, if any?
It
Is
did
this prevalent around the state?
It did not in our MSR, but there are other organizations that regionally throughout the Bay Area that some of these agencies participate in.
All right. I guess if nobody else has any
Any other
concerns
questions?
about that.
Well,
Thank you.
Maybe I can add a little bit to that, Supervisor Hubbard. The Bay Area Clean Water Agency, which is a consortium or is it JPA of all the wastewater treatment plants that discharge into San Francisco Bay, has a study that's going on to, I guess, better coordinate the use of recycled water and fresh water. We were fortunate enough to participate in one of their workshops, and actually the consultants that would have worked for BACWA are now going to be doing our study as a pilot for the entire Bay Area. We're extremely fortunate to find these consultants because they're top caliber people. We had one of them individuals present to us, I think 2 months ago. And I'm really excited about this.
I love the idea of recycling water. We in Dublin recycle 85 to 90% of our municipal
Right.
use of water is recycled. My concern is creating a body that lives on forever and ever when collaboration should be the norm. Are we going to do this forever and ever ongoingly, or are we going to do this for a couple of years?
This is going to be, I guess the primary emphasis of this would be to get the water and wastewater agencies to collaborate on future plans of how we might better work together so that in the future, when a future governor imposes recycling on us as a mandatory issue, we're able to do something that's beneficial to the Bay Area and not have them impose something that Southern California might have done and impose that on us. We want to be able to create our own, something that works for us, because there's a big difference between Northern and Southern California in the need for recycled water and how you use it. So, and
All right.
it's not something that you need forever, but we do need to get these two groups. They're both in silos right now and they don't talk. So,
All right.
Perhaps we can find a way to put a term to this project in the motion, Supervisor or Commissioner Hubbard. Would you like to see a term of, let's say, 3 years or 5 years?
Sure.
I would like it to be maybe every 3 years we would review the progress made and continue to re-up a committee.
That sounds fair.
Thank you.
Okay,
Good.
Sounds
good
like we have
compromise.
agreement.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Totally supportive of the idea. Just
Com-
concerned about an ongoing thing. Okay.
Commissioner Splendorio, would you modify your motion to include that?
If I can frame it, motion to approve the consent calendar without alteration for A, B, C, and E, and as to E, additionally approve, but with that it returns in 3 years for review by the commission.
For clarification, did you refer to D as well? I just heard ABC. Maybe I missed it. ABC, D.
Approve without change, A, B, C, and D,
Okay,
and E to return in 3 years for further review by the commission.
excellent. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion made and seconded. Could we take a roll call vote?
Chair Brown,
Yes.
Chair Faria. Yes. Excuse me, Commissioner Faria, Commissioner Hobart,
Yes.
Commissioner Hernandez.
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson,
Yes.
Commissioner Miley. Commissioner Splendorio,
Aye.
Commissioner, isn't alternate commissioner. Alternate Commissioner Tam,
Yes.
Thank you. Let the record reflect, the motion has passed.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, we're on to agenda item 5, which was previously agenda item 7, the draft report for the county-wide fire protection and emergency medical services. Staff?
Thank you, Chair Brown. So Alameda LAFCO, we recently completed our draft report for the fire protection, municipal service review, and emergency medical services. Staff is requesting that the commission provide any discussion and feedback ahead of initiating a 30-day public review and comment period. And then I believe that the item will turn to the commission at our January meeting. The draft has been prepared as our adopted work plan, and it independently assesses the availability, need, and adequacy of key public services provided in the region. And this includes preparing determinations that address factors required in the statute as part of our municipal service review process, as well as informing future boundary changes. And at this time, no sphere of influence updates of the affected agencies. I do have our consultant, Jennifer Stevenson from Policy Consulting Associates present remotely, and she will provide the commission a presentation before discussion. Yes. Jennifer, if you are there, you are ready to present.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Rachel. Good afternoon, everyone. Once again, I'm Jennifer Stevenson with Policy Consulting Associates. Also presenting will be Richard Berkson from Berkson Associates on the financial components of this review. Because I'm certain that many of you have not had the opportunity to read 462 pages of the report, I'm going to be outlining just generally what you'll be looking at, and then some high-level findings and determinations for the review. Hold on just a moment. Here we go. Okay. So I'm certain that the commission is well aware what a municipal service review is, but for those that are joining us for the first time or are new to this, I just want to briefly describe what exactly it is that the MSR includes and is required for. So an MSR is a state required document, and it is to inform the spheres of influence for those agencies that are under LAFCO's jurisdiction. Those would include special districts and cities. And the sphere of influence is generally defined as an ultimate growth boundary. So an MSR must come to certain determinations. So the required content is outlined in government code and is shown here in these various bullet points. I don't want to read all of them to you, but I do want to focus on a couple that are kind of essential and a focus of the particular service review here. So the first one is that third bullet that covers capacity, adequacy of services, and infrastructure needs and deficiencies. So it's a fairly hefty determination that requires quite a bit of content to be able to come to that determination. And also the sixth bullet, accountability for community service needs and governmental structure and operational efficiencies. This one is what asks LAFCO to come to governance structure options when reviewing the various agencies in order to identify efficiencies of service, which is a goal or aim of LAFCO. So you will find that content, the governance structure options, at the end of the overview chapter of the report. I would recommend that if you're limited on time when you're looking through the review, because it's so lengthy, focus on the executive summary 1, and then the overview chapter, which is chapter 3, which will include those governance structure options, as well as the summary of determinations that's found at the end of each agency's chapter, right? It'll be a bulleted list that will go through each one of these topics. And then an outline of the process to date. We originally went through data discovery, pulling from central data sources, information that's readily available online, but then sent out requests for information to the various agencies under review. The administrative draft was compiled and then was reviewed by agency and LAFCO staff. Edits were made to the report based on the comments received, and then the public review draft was released, which is what you have in your packet in front of you. Today, you'll be opening a public comment period and receiving this presentation. Once the comment period is ended and the comments have been received, they'll be incorporated into the review, and you'll have a draft final for your January meeting to consider for adoption. 18 agencies were reviewed as part of the 18 agencies were reviewed as part of this MSR, 4 special districts and 14 cities. In general, fire and emergency medical services were reviewed last in 2004 as a service level service review. Then again in 2013, the special districts were reviewed individually, including fire and EMS services. And then in 2018, the cities were reviewed, and those reviews included amongst them fire protection and emergency medical services. Of the agencies reviewed, 2 of the special districts provide services directly, fire and EMS services directly. That would be Alameda County Fire Department and East Bay Regional Park District. 1 district, that would be the EMS CSA, conducts local EMS planning across the county. And then Fairview Fire Protection District receives contract services from the city of Hayward. Of the cities, 7 provide services directly with their own fire departments. 5 cities receive contract services from Alameda County Fire Department. Those would be the ones with the stars, Dublin, Emeryville, Newark, San Leandro, and Union City. And then 2 cities, Pleasanton and Livermore, are served by a joint fire department formed through a JPA. And then in addition to these agencies, those agencies that aren't under LAFCO jurisdiction were included to give a comprehensive idea of what the structure is of fire services in the county. Those would include CAL FIRE, Falk, Northern California, Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, and the U.S. Army. Throughout the course of this review, several challenges to services were identified. These challenges are common not only within the county, but among service providers across the state. First and foremost was constrained budgets combined with ever increasing costs, predominantly due in recent years to inflation. Also, the agencies have problems meeting expanding standards and requirements. And then there are multiple service providers and communication systems that are contributing to, as it says, diminished interoperability, response consistency, and efficiency. However, I do have to say, that said, within Alameda County, the communication system has been regionalized to a degree, and the agencies do continue to make plans for further enhancement. So by comparison to other neighboring counties, there across the board were staffing constraints amongst the agencies, and there was some duplication of services provided where efficiencies could be gained in areas such as administration. And then finally, the larger and more frequent wildfires that have been experienced up and down the West Coast. And that brings me to the next slide. the impacts of climate change, particularly in Alameda County. There are several factors that affect demand for fire protection services. The most obvious being growth in population, right? The greater the population, the greater the volume of calls for structural fire and EMS services. But also with greater population comes development of new and expansion of existing structures that leads to greater need for structural fire protection services. Less apparent is the need for wildland fire protection and prevention in those areas where urban development abuts wildland areas. This is also known as the wildland urban interface, or WUI. As development expands outward from the urban core, the WUI extends into areas of greater fire hazard and severity, thus greatly increasing the need for preventative and protective measures in those areas. We'll talk a little bit more about the WUI in just a moment here. But in addition to these, climate change, such as drought, continues to greatly affect the environment, driving the need for wildland fire prevention, protection, and to combat more frequent and substantial fires. So as you'll see here, within Alameda County, there's been a significant impact from climate change, an increase of 1.7 degrees over the last several decades on average, or the maximum temperature, I should say. A severe moisture deficit and drought that's been the most severe over the deficit over the last 1,200 years. 100 more wildfire days annually in the Bay Area from 1973 to 2020. And finally, wildfires just generally becoming more intense, leading to greater loss during fires. The most destructive wildfire in Alameda County occurred in 2020, and that was the lightning complex fires. This trend is expected to continue with more frequent and prolonged higher temperatures, leading to extreme heat events and wildfires that decrease air quality and cause extended periods of drought. Given that a majority of the fire providers are also land use authorities, one means of battling climate change and its impacts are through land use planning documents and strategies. Alameda County agencies have collaborated on a regional level, particularly through the Plan Bay Area 2050. And additionally, cities and counties are required to adopt climate action plans. So the wildland urban interface, or WUI, because the county has experienced consistently strong growth in recent years, it's anticipated to continue to over the next 3 decades. This growth has been concentrated in the urban city areas, but there's been quite a bit of increase of residences in the unincorporated areas as well. And this abuts wildland areas, also known as the WUI, areas that are primarily these areas are primarily surrounding the Tri-Valley area of Livermore, Pleasanton, and Dublin, and the territory east of the Interstate 880 corridor from the northern county line to the southern county line. As development expands outward from the urban core, the WUI extends into greater areas of greater fire hazard severity, thus increasing the need for preventative and protective measures. There's approximately 70 miles of WUI separating areas of local responsibility area from the 250,000 acres of CAL FIRE jurisdiction. The area is densely populated with homes that easily exceed $1 million each. So you have high values at risk and windy conditions combined that can create high damage events. And here's a map of this WUI area. There's 3 different types of WUI interface areas. Those are the areas that are developed areas that have sparse or no wildland vegetation, but are in close proximity to large patch of wildland. There's intermix areas where houses and wildland vegetation directly intermingle. And then there's influence areas. And those are the areas in green that you're seeing that are quite expansive. Those are wildfire susceptible vegetation up to 1.5 miles from WUI or wildland urban intermix zones. Within the county, there's 256 square miles that's categorized as influence, as WUI influence area. And unfortunately, we don't have an overlap map, but you can see that quite a bit of that WUI is in areas of high or very high fire hazard severity based on this map. There are several conditions in Alameda County that contribute to its fire risk hazard level, including extensive wildlands terrain in the eastern portion of the county. You can see those are the orange and the red areas that are high and very high fire hazard. These areas abut the wildland development that abuts the wildland areas. And then the other major condition is the major interstate corridors that run the length north and south and east and west throughout the county. Of note on this map, and I just bring it up because it's a good reference so that you can see it, is the crosshatch green area. That's a federal responsibility areas. That's the U.S. Army Camp Parks in Dublin and the Don Edwards San Francisco Bay National Wildlife Refuge, where the federal government is responsible for fire services. So given the accelerating impacts of climate change on wildfire, particularly in the WUI areas, several legislative requirements have been established to align public safety planning efforts with hazard mitigation and land use planning efforts. The focus of the new requirements mandates that the safety element of the general plan be updated concurrently with the housing element every 8 years. And the safety element should also contain general hazard and risk reduction strategies complementary to those of the local hazard mitigation plan. Additionally, that local hazard mitigation plan is to be incorporated into the safety element as a supplementary attachment. So it's kind of circular. And then Alameda agencies are working towards compliance with these requirements, with many of the agencies already in compliance. I'll pass it over to Richard for this slide.
Thank you, Jennifer. I'm Richard Bergson. I prepared a financial review contained in the MSR and the findings. It was based on a combination of agency responses to the data request and also a review of financial audits and budget documents for the period of fiscal year 18 through fiscal year 22. Of course, COVID had a big impact during that period, although towards the end of it, most agencies were pulling out. The agencies differ widely in their impacts and their responses. Generally speaking, property tax revenues remained relatively strong, at least better than was expected over that period. Of course, city fire departments rely on a range of revenue sources, many of which were affected to a greater degree: sales tax, hotel taxes, and other city revenues that get shared among the departments. Overall, and again, this varies by agency, revenue growth did not keep pace with cost growth over that period. As I mentioned, city fire departments face additional budget pressures from competing city priorities to fund other services and costs. Looking into the future, it's clear that continuing cost factors will present ongoing challenges, and agencies are dealing with these in a variety of ways. So Jennifer, back to you.
Okay, we're on to a summary of some of the major determinations that you'll find in the report. There's been 9.4% growth across the county since 2010. And that is the equivalent of 0.8% average annual growth over that time period. Most of the growth occurred in the unincorporated areas. In particular, the city of Dublin had the highest growth rate during that time. And then it's anticipated to continue. ABEG projects 54% growth over the 35-year time period from 2015 to 2050. So this is indicated by a significant number of major projects that are in various stages of development throughout the county. We found almost 30,000 proposed dwelling units across the county and 5.6 million square feet of commercial space that has the potential to be developed or in various stages of development. And most notably, the cities of Fremont and Oakland account for the largest percentage of these projects. LAFCO is required to come to a determination regarding disadvantaged unincorporated communities based on the definition in the LAFCO law. The community of Ashland is considered the county's only census designated place that meets the income definition. However, it's important to note that it is provided essential services, including structural fire protection and emergency medical. And now we're on to that hefty determination, capacity, adequacy, and infrastructure needs and deficiencies. And these are very general determinations. For individualized determinations, you would have to go to the end of the chapters for each of the agencies reviewed. But in general, and we've already mentioned it as a challenge, staffing levels are the primary capacity constraint amongst the agencies that were reviewed. Some cities have stations with unit hour utilizations nearing or exceeding 20% threshold that indicates a strained workload. And what this means is that 20% of the time the engine or fire station staff are in use or responding to a call. The reason this becomes a concern is because response times are based generally on a 90th percentile. So if an engine or company is responding, beyond that 20% threshold, there's those times when they are too busy to immediately respond. So they are not going to meet their 90th percentile response time goals if they're busy or in use. There are service adequacy was generally based on response times compared to adopted standards or industry best practices, as well as their ISO ratings. It was a bit of a struggle to come to determinations regarding some of these things because of lack of information provided by or data provided by the agencies that were reviewed. While many of the agencies do not meet their adopted response time standards, their response times were generally nearing the identified standard. So it was found that all agencies appear to provide adequate services with certain constraints to capacity, as I've noted, the staffing and the need for additional staff at these stations for lower unit hour utilizations. And then finally, most of the agencies maintain appropriate planning documents in order to address the identified infrastructure needs. So there are no critical infrastructure needs that were identified that haven't been planned for.
All right. Based on the financial review, we were able to conclude that all agencies do have the financial ability to provide service, although clearly there's challenges that remain. In other words, there were no financial red flag warnings that we saw. All agencies show adequate reserves that were helpful over the past several years to help buffer, in some cases, revenue reductions. Many of the agencies also took actions which varied and included freezing positions, deferring major capital, and deferring other one-time expenditures. Over the longer term, agencies are addressing financial challenges, for instance, by pre-funding, paying down OPEB and pension liabilities, utilizing dedicated and voter-approved taxes. For instance, in Alameda County, funds were approved for major capital improvements, and also through fees and fees keeping pace with inflation, and sharing coordinated resources, for instance, as dispatch services.
Okay. Thank you, Richard. Now, with regard to shared facilities, I have to say that in Alameda County, the agencies demonstrated extensive collaboration through joint studies, grants, contracts and partnerships, facility and resource sharing, regionalization of dispatch, and implementation of closest resource dispatching. There do continue to be opportunities for further collaboration, and the agencies reviewed generally indicated that they were open to further collaborative and resource sharing opportunities. That brings us to governance structure options. And I should preface these first four really should have the word further in front of them. Many of these are already, there have been efforts towards or in the process of implementation, but there's opportunities for further steps to realize some of these. So the first one is further regionalization of communication. There's been significant enhancements to the communication and dispatch system in the county over the last 15 years. Fire and EMS dispatches increasingly become regionalized. Many agencies are using the Alameda County Regional Emergency Communications Center. Additionally, improvements have been made to the county's communication system through the East Bay Regional Communications System Authority that provides fully interoperable communications to member public agencies. This regionalization and interconnection of communication and dispatch systems should be continued to the degree possible. And one of the reasons this is recommended is in order to implement closest resource dispatch, which is the next bullet. Across the state, there's been a trend towards using closest resource dispatch strategy countywide to ensure fastest response times. This means that all agencies' boundaries are essentially eliminated for dispatch purposes so that the closest resource can respond. It enhances efficiency for the benefit of the constituents. There's steps towards transitioning to the closest resource dispatch strategy have been made on a local level in Alameda with Alameda County Fire Department and the Livermore Pleasanton Fire Department. They've agreed to a streamlined automatic mutual aid agreement where either agency can be automatically dispatched to eliminate the delay in dispatch for requested mutual aid. So it's recommended that Alameda fire providers review and consider the possibility of a conversion to a fully implemented model. The degree to which the closest resource system can be executed, however, is restricted by communication and dispatch structure capabilities. Alameda County fire providers have a history of regionalization, which have reduced duplication of efforts and enhanced efficiencies. Using these transitions as models, there is the potential for further regionalization to reap similar benefits. The most feasible options available are contracting with a neighbor agency for services, such as Alameda County Fire contract services to the 5 cities, or a joint powers authority for functionally consolidated services, such as the Livermore Pleasanton Fire Department. The primary benefits would be economies of scale, and regional fire service coordination and planning to the greatest degree. It's recommended that the agencies continue to consider a structural change such as those mentioned, which may be beneficial. So once again, further regional planning and coordination of prevention and suppression efforts is recommended. There's already an effort underway to develop a formal agreement between stakeholder agencies to reduce wildfire threat in both Alameda and Contra Costa counties to address increasing threats from wildfire, pool resources at a regional level, and enhance coordination amongst multiple responders. Efforts of this nature that enhance regional planning and coordination of prevention and suppression have value added in other portions, could have value added in other portions of the county and the Bay Area overall. The next bullet is to become a contract county of the state. 6 counties in California have opted to provide contract services to the state. They fill CAL FIRE's obligations within their counties. Given the evolution of fire services that's occurred in recent decades, assessing the possibility of Alameda County transitioning to a contract county to the state may be warranted. And this was actually discussed a couple of decades ago, it sounds like, between Alameda and Santa Clara County. So inclusion of Santa Clara and Contra Costa and the restructuring would create a more cohesive fire service structure in the Bay Area. And finally, it's been reviewed multiple times in the past as the reorganization of Fairview Fire Protection District. It does continue to be an option, although it's been reviewed before and no change has occurred since. The district remains the sole independent fire protection district in the county and contracts for services from the city of Hayward. When they were last reviewed in 2013, district residents were vocally opposed to reorganization because the district does not provide any direct services, but rather administers a contract for service provision. Certain operating and administrative expenses could be avoided by dissolving the district and having another existing service provider take on governance and operations of fire service in the area. Brings us to the end of the presentation. I'm available for questions or comments, or Richard is as well.
All right, thank you, Jennifer and Richard, for your presentation. Do we have any questions? It was a great detailed conversation. Yes, council member. Council member, I just made change your job. Sorry, Commissioner Johnson.
So I've got a couple of comments. One is that when I went to the Cal LAFCO conference, one of the sessions I attended was about fire departments, are they ticking time bombs? And the topic generated into mostly how they dealt with paramedic service and ambulance services. And then I read through the section in this report about the county, the CSA for EMS, and it's really complicated. Would it be possible, Rachel, for us to have a presentation from the EMS people to get a better understanding of, I mean, they fund trauma rooms, they have the ambulance contract, they do a lot of things, and it's probably I'm not going to suggest it, but it could be an MSR of its own.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Johnson. That's a great suggestion, and that is something that I will coordinate offline.
Thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Warner. Oh, sorry, Commissioner Faria. Okay. Ladies first.
I had a concern from the perspective of the emergency medical responses. The situation with delayed response and the impact on those people that are receiving the services based upon the care requirements that are established by professional organizations, such as having an acute cardiac arrest. There's a time frame that was creates the best response for the person being served. And it sounds like from the report that there was issues previously and they've been corrected, I believe, and there was a fine implemented, but I didn't see where there was a plan to make a change and what that would encompass. And so that was my question.
I can't answer to the plan, but that can be something that we have in one of our recommendations that comes out of this public draft and the final report, to have them provide a plan to us and that we can follow back up on within maybe a 6-month or 1-year period.
Sounds good.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Warner.
Yeah, I'd like to build on the previous two comments. The emergency services in Alameda County, in the Tri-Valley and the Livermore Pleasanton area have been inadequate in the past, so much so that the firefighters union has complained. And so there's enough smoke there to say that there's an issue. I don't think it's been solved. And so as this review is done, it really is worth drilling in, as Ralph suggested, into what's really going on here. Let's get the data. It's been not easy to get the data for the response times out of the county through Falk. And so I think the role of LAFCO in reviewing things is to, one of those bullet points that is to ensure the adequacy of the service. And I think the service at the moment is inadequate. And I think it's also due to the structural way the contract is written. And so I think to the extent that LAFCO can look at the numbers for what's being provided, is there an issue? And to what extent does the form of the contract that's been entered into in the past has contributed to the inadequacies? And I would like to see a comparison with Contra Costa, which I believe has a different contract, don't have the issues. And so to the extent that LAFCO is empowered and is important, number one job for government is public safety. And I think it's falling down with respect to emergency services at the moment. So it's incumbent upon this organization and others to look seriously at and quantify the extent there's a problem, what the root causes are, and make recommendations for correction.
I would agree with that. Yes. Commissioner Splendorio.
I'm sorry, I didn't go through every city or jurisdiction's report, but I did want to ask a few questions about general cooperation. Did you get adequate cooperation from each jurisdiction to feel that the report, when final, is adequate? Or would you like to see more or get more cooperation?
I believe in the report, and Jennifer can fill in too as well, that some of the cities or some of the agencies reviewed did not provide all the response time data, and that's what we had to kind of fish for. But I'll let Jennifer answer that. I know it was difficult when we first initiated the report because a lot of these fire agencies were kind of dealing with fires at the time. So we had to wait on receiving that information. I believe overall they all cooperated in the end, but it just took a lot of time. And if Jennifer wants to add anything.
Yeah, I would say overall, a majority of the agencies provided information, whether it was comprehensive, that's another question. There was definitely a lack of detailed information as far as response times go. from a majority of the agencies. And there were a couple of, there was a singular agency that did not provide any information, and that was City of Oakland. Otherwise, we at least received something from everyone else.
All right.
But
So
response times was the lacking area. Mhm.
all right. So yeah, no surprise at Oakland. I mean, historically, my tenure here has not been very cooperative in any municipal review. However, would it behoove us, or would it be effective to redouble our efforts and ask for more detailed information? Or is it saying, we really mean it this time and we'll get the same response? I'm asking for your opinion because I think this is really important, as Commissioner Warner pointed out. This is a public safety issue, and we should pay very close attention to the, especially emergency responsiveness and fire protection, of course. And let's get as complete a report as we can and take the time to do that. I guess that's a question. Is it worth trying again?
I don't know about asking for all of the information from those standouts that weren't able to provide it, but perhaps picking a couple of key data points that are most important, response times being one of them. We could reach back out even to the agencies that did provide it, generally did not provide what was asked for. So we could ask once again of each of them to see what could be provided, but making it specific so that it's very clear of what's being requested.
Right, one more question. Did you include, and there are, and I don't know the right word here, if these are private service providers, but for example, the lab has a fire department. And I know it has a mutual aid agreement with Livermore Pleasanton and maybe with Alameda Fire. But if there are others in the county, were those included in the study, or were they just, or did they report up somehow through another jurisdiction?
They were included in the report to the extent to provide an overall picture of the structure of fire services. So there is a section dedicated to those agencies that aren't under LAFCO review. It's brief, but it does provide a summary of how services are provided by each of those entities.
Yes, Commissioner Hopper.
When we're not getting information, do we sit down and meet face to face with agencies, or do we send emails back and forth? How are we asking for the information? And I'm all for continuing to ask, but if we expect a different result, then maybe might want to try something different. Just as a general comment, I'm hoping that we are able to get the information that we need. At the same time, I want to say, with regard to emergency services, it's no secret that we're going out to bid. The state controls the way in which we do that. There's delays with the state reviewing that process. It's complicated, and that doesn't excuse anything. And I think Commissioner Warner and Commissioner Brown, and I know all of us are sensitive and concerned and have expressed concern to our emergency response team at the county continually. But I also have to say what Commissioner Warner said, to the extent possible that we can make a difference. We also have to stay in our lane, so to speak. But if we have the ability to push, we should use it. So agreed that we need to pay a lot of attention to it. We are in other areas with regard to the RFP that's been let out, and there's a lot of eyes on this, but it's very complicated. So we got to be careful about what lane we stay in. So
You want to go in all the lanes.
Yeah.
Sometimes. Okay, thank you. Good feedback. Any other questions? Commissioner Miley, any questions? Okay, I saw Commissioner Tam's hand raised earlier, and so I see that it's.
Yeah, you had answered the question about Oakland, but I was just wondering about their 911 system and because they have their own, whether in sort of the regional efforts, whether they're going to be looking at being part of the region now because of all the problems they've been having.
From the report and the information that we gathered, they have not, but that is one recommendation in the report that we're suggesting, and we're suggesting that to most of the affected agencies.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Carla.
I had a few questions, comments. Perhaps this is best for Jennifer, but on page 61 of your report, it refers to the budget expenditures for the Livermore Pleasanton Fire Department at an astounding $46,000, 46 million, excuse me. Was that divided by two? Because we share expenses as noted in your report, where comparatively the city of San Leandro is about 89,000 people and they're at 26 million. If you take that number and you split it, maybe we will be out of the extremely high category.
Richard, do you know if that was divided by two?
We looked at the entity as it was combined, although in the appendix tables, we did provide more detailed breakdown of the numbers, but we'll take another look at how it's described in the report to be sure that it's clear.
Thank you, because if you tie it to population, it's not a 50-50 exactly, because the city of Livermore is slightly higher. And while I have you up there, or somebody, also on page 70 of the report, it refers to areas serviced by Alameda County Fire, and it is not including the city of Dublin. And I know I've got many Dublin experts here, but I thought it's the orange chart. The city of Dublin is not in orange. Is there a reason that wasn't included in Alameda County support for the Alameda County Fire Department?
Sorry, looking. It looks like the orange is purely the unincorporated area that's served by Alameda County Fire Department. It does not include the contract cities. So none of the contract cities are included in that map.
Okay, I don't see that in the title of the report. It just says serviced by sphere of influence. But it says Alameda County Fire Department supported, and especially down at the bottom. So maybe it's an asterisk. Okay, thank you. We found with Falk Services that the amount of support that is offered to City of Oakland, at least in the East County, we battle, as mentioned earlier, for equal support services. And if you were offering something like a contract county, then how would areas that are more outlying, for example, the East County area, be receiving support services? Because with Falk, there's more calls in the city of City of Oakland. It's a bigger city. It has more demands. We have seen the ambulances, and they're much, much more to the west side of the county. So any kind of proposal for a contract countywide would lend me to be concerned. What's your comment about that?
The reference to being a contract county is as far as fire protection services go in the areas that are presently served by CAL FIRE. So what would happen is the likely Alameda County Fire or whatever would take on the services that are provided by CAL FIRE and be reimbursed by the state for those services provided. The idea being that the contract agency could provide those services, the contract agency being the county, could provide those services at less of a lower cost than CAL FIRE can, and could reap benefits of gaining a revenue source, would be the idea behind that. But so as far as EMS services go and ambulance services, I don't know that it would affect ambulance transportation or response. It would continue to be as the contract states with the county and EMS CSA.
But to be fair, I'm not talking ambulances. I'm just talking about that as an example. That when you have a very high population at one end of the county, for example, the city of Oakland, and then you have a long county and then out in East County, I just would want to be sure once you hand things over to the state that we're going to continue to get the support that we get now, which is very strong, and we have good support services until we reach out to the ambulance, and then all things fall apart. With regards to cost, if there is an entire county-wide, or as you referred to the closest service, financially, how would that work? So that, is there a billing that goes back and forth because the city of San Leandro has an available fire station, it goes into Hayward? And so do they keep track of the money, or is it just all the funds are thrown into one big pot?
Typically, it's not reimbursed based on responses. That would be up to the agencies themselves to determine if it's an issue of concern or not. I would say that generally they've already defined the areas where another agency can maybe respond faster. They already have automatic aid agreements or mutual aid agreements for these areas. So they've already been identified. And in those cases, they're already tracking what the calls are for services there and who is responding to these areas. So each one of the agencies would have access to the information if that was going to be a concern, where another agency was going to be responding often within the boundaries of another neighboring agency, to be able to highlight that in any kind of agreement that they came to regarding this closest resource. Really, generally what has happened in other counties is there's just a drop of boundaries, and the dispatch system is comprehensively regionalized, and they're fully interoperable, so they're able to call out whoever is nearest.
Well, we have that now, and I think Dublin ends up responding to our senior housing project, and Dublin
responds a lot to Livermore.
Dublin responds to Livermore because they're in proximity, and it could cause problems. So you're trying to simplify things. Sometimes they become more complex.
But I will be thankful because San Ramon actually helps us and provide, even though it's a different county,
yeah,
they provide more of like the El Costa Avenue area.
Right. Yeah. Now you're talking about county because you're right near a county line, which makes it even more complex, right? Okay. Those were my questions. Thank you for answering them. Do we have any public speaking? And then I'd like to come back to the council for comments. Do you have another question?
I have more questions.
Okay. All right. We've got more questions.
Progress you want to go. So I've got two areas. One is governance. And if we can go back to, not yet, but I want to talk about the wildlife urban interface first. I'm glad you raised it, and I think I'll say more about this when we talk about the South Livermore plan. But is it worth analyzing how irrigated ag prevents a fire break? I'm only raising that because I've raised it before. I know that there are instances in Sonoma County, Napa County, Solano County where it did stop fires, well, we know it stops fires. So is that worth analyzing here, especially in South Livermore and a little bit of Pleasanton, where there is that availability? Is that worth looking at and giving maybe some knowledge to some of the cities and counties in the county to recognize that if you encourage the irrigated ag, that it can save and save lives, of course, but of course save property and life. So that's just one comment.
Vineyards, for example.
Yeah, vineyards, and I was personally experienced that in 2020 when I had to evacuate, and I was told by CFD that they expected the vineyards in the south part of Livermore to save the city of Livermore. In essence, they knew that most of the Venti vineyards would stop the fire. Of course, it never got that close, but that was still it was an impact by me. I also saw in the report that it said talk about a proliferation of a building, and I don't know if that was unincorporated, was that incorporated that impinged into the wildlife urban interface? I couldn't distinct, because I mean, we don't get a lot of out-of-area service agreements for unincorporated. We get a few, but when I say a proliferation, I'm like, well, where is that proliferation in unincorporated? Because I don't think we've seen it. But if it's incorporated that is pushing into the wild, then I would understand it a little bit better. And again, it's just questions I'm asking. If you can look into that in the draft. And then if we can look at the governance models, and I know this is not necessarily for the report, but it's something that I've learned over the years from Cal LAFCO that, there are counties that only have one fire district. I think San Mateo and LA County only have one fire district. And not to say that's the right model for every county. It's just that it would be nice to hear more about that. And again, educate whoever happens to read this report, why they do what they do and whether it's beneficial or not. And then the last one, which is, I recognize Fairview is, if you're a LAFCO nerd, it shouldn't exist. I understand that. I mean, at least but however, it is very small. It has a board that strongly believes that it's representing its local interests, understood. And I don't know if we have the stomach to really do much more about that, except to point out that in some other LAFCOs would be more aggressive. But I just thought I'd point it out because in the past we've looked at it, and if you were to bring this up to other LAFCOs in other parts of the state, they would look at that and recognize it doesn't need to be there, except to protect 5 or 7 people, whatever commissioners. I'm kind of probably opinionated on that, but anyway, but I thought I'd end with that. A little bomb.
Okay, that's the questions. All right. Any other questions? Yes.
I've got a response for Splin. Last time we looked at Fairview, their governance structure was pretty bad. They've gone a long way to improving their governance structure. They now have part-time fire chief, which I know we've observed their operation, firsthand. I think they're doing a pretty good job. I agree with you as being a LAFCO nerd that probably shouldn't be the way it is, but I think they've got community support.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, seeing none from our commission members. Do we have anybody from the public that would like to speak?
Yes, we do. Mr. Abreu, are you on the line? You have 3 minutes to speak.
All right. Okay, I hope that this microphone is working. Well, first of all, on this idea of a LAFCO nerd, that would only happen if you had like lifetime appointments, like the Supreme Court, where people could stay on the LAFCO for like 17 years. And if that were to happen, then you would probably get an entrenched political factions that sit there and represent themselves. The Alameda County ambulance contract renegotiation has been delayed. Now, if you watched what they told you 6 months ago, they told you they're going to get this finished up by right about now, or maybe even earlier. But now they pushed it out 2 years. 2 years. So this is not a going out to bid contract complication. And this doesn't happen to the city of San Diego. City of San Diego is going to court to get rid of Falk. The county is incentivized to cut corners because it gets paid millions of dollars for this exclusive operating area for the ambulance contract, millions of dollars. So, if a few people aren't getting picked up in Livermore or Pleasanton or wherever, look at the benefits, the millions. Also, this safety element, review of the safety element of the general plan. I am very disappointed that you never even, at least I didn't hear anything about section 4.0, the flood hazards. That's page 48 of the report. For example, policy number 2, the county shall control runoff to mitigate downstream flood hazards. It shall require, that means you have to file for stormwater permits with the regional board. The county doesn't do that. It just tells the landowner, hey, you go do it. And if the landowner doesn't do that, We don't have any surface stormwater runoff protection, and the county washes its hands of responsibility. Look at policy 10 and policy 20. The county shall work with Zone 7 Water Agency to provide for flood control systems. The county shall implement warning systems and evacuation plans for developed areas located within known hazard areas. I would recommend that you think about Sunol Glen Elementary School, which has flooded 2 or 3 times in the last 30 years. And I would ask, why don't you do those warning systems and evacuation plans? Think about these things. You need to implement these things. How about policy 11, flood control measures for preservation of natural riparian habitat and preservation of scenic values of the county's arroyos and creeks? That goes along with action number 13, review and revise chapter 13.12 water course ordinance to comply with state and federal flood control requirements. The water course ordinance, under the misdirection and damaging.
Mr. Abreu, your time is up.
All right, thank you. Do we have any other speakers?
No, ma'am.
A close public comment. What today we're looking for is a presentation of the draft, discussion and feedback of staff initiating a 30-day public review, and this is a comment period. And any other comments before we close this item? All right, seeing none. Thank you very much for your presentation, both Richard and Jennifer. And we'll release Jennifer to go on to her next meeting because I know she had a tight schedule. So if we could proceed forward with agenda item now, agenda item 6, the final report for LAFCO South Livermore Valley Special Study. Staff?
Thank you, Chair. So you received a draft report for our South Livermore Valley area study in July of this year. Of course, now we have a final report that comes back to you. We did initiate a 30-day public review and comment period on this report. And we received a few comments that are shown in the staff report, and we incorporated those comments accordingly and as we see fit. We made some changes and provided some additional information based off of commission discussion at our July meeting to incorporate in this final report. And today I have Scott Gregory from Lanphier Gregory to present those changes and additional information for that final report on our South Livermore Valley Special Study.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. It's a pleasure to be back again. Report to you on our final draft of the South Livermore Special Study. As just a quick reminder, the goals of this study were to kind of provide a retrospective review about the acreage of agricultural development that has occurred within the South Livermore Valley, changes in spheres of influence, annexation issues, how much urban development has occurred in the area, where that urban development has occurred, the status of existing acreage of agriculture and particularly wineries within South Livermore as compared to prior years, how many acres of open space and agriculture are preserved through conservation easements, and the potential impact of cannabis cultivation on wineries and agriculture. We also kind of added to that study when we started to address in our scope a number of more current events related to South Livermore Valley. Those events included the Water Board's general waste discharge requirements for winery process, which became effective and affect winery operations. How might the city's plans for extended sewer service to the Livermore Valley affect existing and potential new development? How might the city's plans for the sewer service affect the urban growth boundary and the abilities of the spheres of influence? What other factors are relevant to Alameda LAFCO's mission that might affect the viability of agricultural businesses within the valley? Additionally, what are the important policy and procedural implications of Alameda County LAFCO relative to the city of Livermore's proposed sewer expansion project?
So as Rachel had mentioned, we presented our draft report on all of those findings back in July of this last summer. Shortly thereafter, Rachel distributed that draft report to a number of stakeholders for their public review. And we did receive a handful of comments back on that document from the City of Livermore, County of Alameda, Department of Conservation, and additionally the UC Extension Service. We got comments back from the Tri-Valley Conservancy and the Livermore Valley Wine Community. It's no longer, it's not the Wine Growers Association, the wine community. And then a number of individuals, including David Kent and Paul Speroni. In response to those comments that we received, as well as the comments that we received during our hearing on the draft here before your commission, we prepared a final South Livermore Special Study report, and that was prepared in October. And we're now presenting that information to the board for your consideration for acceptance. Some of the significant changes that were made or additions that were made to the report when we presented our draft in July, there was questions that pertain to the extent that we addressed nitrates as a factor for the groundwater quality and as it relates to the water board's order, but that there were other factors as well related to salinity and biological oxygen demand. So we have added sections within the report, both in terms of existing conditions pertaining to salinity of the main groundwater basin and background on Zone 7's water agencies, Zone 7 water agencies salt management plan. And we have just added additional discussion related to biological oxygen demand, how it relates to both winery process water and septic systems and treatment plants and how they function. So that information has been added. There was also questions that specifically related to table 1 of that draft report, which showed the extent of development that has occurred pursuant to the South Livermore Valley specific plan in terms of its residential development, which showed virtually all of the residential development pursuant to that plan had occurred, whereas only about 3 of the 16 commercial development sites that were identified within that specific plan had been developed. There are questions as to why, where those were, and what the status of and what those land uses occurred. So we have added information, including this chart, which shows each of those 16 commercial sites pursuant to the South Livermore Valley specific plan. Those that are identified with a red dot are those that have been actually developed pursuant to the specific plan provisions. And all of those with a white dot are those properties that are either vacant or are wineries or are other land use activities other than those that were anticipated or expected pursuant to the South Livermore specific plan. So there's of the 16, there's 4 that have been 5 that have been developed as anticipated, and about 11 of those properties that are either that were not developed. And there was questions about why they might not have been developed. And that's, I think, a more difficult question to answer. I think it's a combination, as the Livermore's City Planning Department staff report suggests. Okay, that there are concerns about market demand. The newer wineries that have occurred, smaller newer wineries that have occurred within the Livermore Valley, have certainly been made use of the winery and arts district location that is located on Vasco Road and East Road. That has been a more popular location for the establishment of new wineries. There's certainly the specific plan itself is very specific and prescriptive about the types of uses that can be developed, specifically saying wineries or bed and breakfast accommodations. And there are very rigorous and detailed design guidelines. So all of those factors may come into play as it relates to why those properties were not developed. And I think much of that has been addressed as part of our additional information in the report. There we go. With the assistance of the Livermore Valley Wine community, we were able to update our list of current existing wineries within the valley. We recognize that as of 2019, when realizing the Heritage Report was prepared, there were about 45 existing wineries in the valley. Since that time, about 7 of those wineries have now, we had not been able to identify 7 of those wineries, and got confirmation that many of those had ceased operation. However, 7 additional wineries have been established since that time. So overall, there was 45 in 2019. There remains 45 in 2023. There are 7 different new wineries. As I had mentioned, there's a concentration of wineries along East Avenue, and South Vasco Road, within the city of Livermore. That area is served by sanitary sewer service. It's a concentration, it's a district, and many of the newer, smaller wineries that have occurred have filled in within that district within existing space, as opposed to smaller wineries further out into the valley. We had a number of comments that questioned or validated our assumptions about acreage of vineyard lands within the valley and cultivated croplands. So we've gone back and validated the acreage that we provided. We got good information from both Zone 7, the water agency, and from realizing the heritage and other sources that pretty well confirmed our assumptions about the total acreages of approximately 2,800 acres of vineyard lands within the Livermore Valley, and a couple hundred acres more of orchards, for a total of about 3,000 acres of cultivated land, cultivated agriculture within the South Livermore Valley. That compares to the South Livermore Valley Area Plan's goal of 5,000 acres, representing still a shortage of about 2,000 acres of cultivated agricultural lands that were expected or hoped for pursuant to that county South Livermore Valley Area Plan. There were questions that were raised in terms of the potential for the extension of sewer service into South Livermore Valley to risk the increased urbanization or growth and development of South Livermore Valley. We've added this additional figure, which shows both the urban growth boundary as that red line, which has strong policy implications that require votes of county or city populations before any development can occur on the other side, on the outside of that red urban growth boundary. It also shows established conservation easements held by the Tri-Valley Conservancy that hold those lands as permanent conservation and open space lands. As you can see from this figure, the majority of that urban growth boundary is already preserved by existing conservation easements, such that the potential expansion and creep of urbanization has been substantially held in check by both policy implications and by on-the-ground conservation easements. I just wanted to present this this last image one more time. This image presents the City of Livermore's proposed sewer line extension down Buena Vista Avenue to Tesla Road and Tesla Road to Greenville. It also identifies in both green, blue, and yellow colors the proximity of individual parcels to that sewer line, suggesting that these are properties that would be most likely to be connections to that sewer service line should it be established. And that the different colors also represent different kinds of implications for LAFCO's consideration pertaining to the extension of sewer service to unincorporated areas, and how that service could be considered. Some of those areas are both adjacent to City Livermore boundaries. There are other areas, such as in the yellow area, that are not adjacent to Livermore or to Livermore's sphere, but that would be likely adjacent to a sewer service line should it be extended. I'd like to finish kind of I described a little bit of the changes that we did make to the report. Some of the things that we did not do, and pursuant to comments that we received, is that we did not do engineering level cost estimating of the Livermore sewer line extension. is clearly beyond the scope of our services, perhaps something that is of critical interest and need for pursuit of that project, but not necessarily part of our contract or of Alameda LAFCO's responsibility to provide. And then there was a suggestion that the Alameda LAFCO study should really address economic feasibility and an economic feasibility and a gap study that would identify barriers limiting the valley as a premier wine region, identify market conditions that might stimulate wine and tourism economy, and recommend land use and economic development policy to address those concerns. While we think that those are great ideas for another study, they again would be beyond the scope of our study to pursue, and something that we would think would be a great study to be done by the jurisdiction with land use jurisdiction, as opposed to LAFCO doesn't have that. So that would conclude our presentation. I'm happy to address any further questions that you may have.
All right, thank you for your presentation. Any questions?
Just more of a comment. When we attended the Cal LAFCO conference, this has to do with out of service contracts. Right now, I think every individual would have to have an out of service contract. What Cal LAFCO is suggesting is that through state legislation, you can take an area and I guess have a special consideration for that area so that you'd kind of relieve all of the bureaucracy of having people hook up. But it would take state legislation to do that. But it sounds like other LAFCOs have done that.
And we had recommended consideration of something like a master services agreement, where individuals could sign up perhaps at the initiation of the process, and then if they change their mind over time, there would be a service master agreement that they could just add on to that process and reconfigure numbers and properties as they go. Because otherwise you are looking at an awful lot of individual properties signing individual agreements.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Hubbard.
Along those lines, Buena Vista Road in unincorporated Alameda County, Livermore, and if the sewer line is extended down that road, there's a lot of homes that are currently on septic that we would want to have be serviced, but if they don't annex into the city, would they be required to have an out of service area agreement, or would it require state legislation? Should we be seeking that to allow them to have a master services agreement and opt in individually? Is that an option?
We could pursue either way. I know that City of Livermore has been talking to many of those residents, as has the county, about annexation opportunities, and that would require a vote of those residents and whether they wanted to or not.
Obviously, if they do, then they would be required. And if they don't, then the option would be an out of service agreement or a master agreement that would allow individuals to opt in individually.
Correct.
Because 50 out of service area agreements would be a nightmare.
I agree, and there's probably a lot more than that.
Yep, right, okay.
As a follow-up,
What I will say one more in regards to that topic is that when we did talk to City Livermore staff, they acknowledged that Buena Vista Road and that the Buena Vista neighborhood was a unique location, a unique neighborhood within Livermore. That their intent was not to try to essentially urbanize that street with urban city street standards for street width, sidewalks, curb gutter, lights, etc. That they might otherwise do under an annexation process, and that they would likely not be pursuing that kind of rigor for an annexation and limit it strictly to that connection to the sewer system.
Okay.
Sorry, as a follow-on, is it possible to do pre-annexation agreements? If somebody is interested in annexation, they come forward to the city and the county. We do pre-annexation in Pleasanton. That's why I'm asking the question.
Yes, so for out of area service agreements, we do make the landowners sign a pre-annexation agreement with that, and that would still be the custom in this case.
So that you didn't have 20 or 50 individual landowners coming forward independently.
I guess it would depend, because it's an out of area service agreement. We would they usually would be on a case by case basis. it's going to depend how, LAFCO and the county and the city of Livermore, work out the best practice in an agreement. I would assume, for some of those areas, there would be just one large out-of-area service agreement for some parts, for that sewer connection, but that would require still more discussions between the city and LAFCO, and as well as include the county.
Certainly. Spun, Commissioner?
Oh, yeah, I've got a lot to say. Sorry.
We're just trying to, if anybody's watching, we're trying to figure out where our folks that have called in on Zoom are.
They're still on there. We just can't see them on the screen.
Okay,
So we're
good.
just
I
trying
want to
bring
make
it
sure they
back.
can hear. All right, thank you. Commissioner?
Thank you, Chair. So thank you so much for the report. I don't have any additional changes, comments. I think it's great as it is. And I'll start off with my comment is I hope that the jurisdictions, Alameda County, Livermore, and somewhat Pleasanton, read it and recognize what I'm about to say, which is the wine country you're losing it. And that's what this is telling me. And I'll give you, and I'm hoping that they look at it and say, look, maybe we should take a look at this again and see if we can fix what probably was ill-conceived to begin with, and as time has developed. But I want to focus on two things. One is the actual viticulture, the farming aspect of it. The UC Davis study says what it says, and it says that your house is on fire, you do something about it. That's just for the local wine industry. And there's some solutions built in there. The sewer, which Livermore was great, and the county was great in supporting. Hopefully that'll solve some issues. But you also have a lot of acreage that was planted as a result of the South Livermore plan that clearly does not have a home anymore. And which leads to two things. One is eventually it's going to need to be pulled. I mean, it's going to be ineffective. So what are you going to do with that acreage if there isn't a market for it? And I'm not talking to us, but really to those that are the owners and the municipalities and the county. So what are you going to do with that? You want to preserve it because it is important, like I mentioned, for the wildlife urban interface for fire protection. It's important, but it's also protected for your, the values of people's homes. People look at that and how beautiful it is. And then the other part of it is there was an expectation that hopefully those grapes would be used by some local wineries. And of course, this study in UC Davis says that they don't need any more unless you build more. Right. And the sites that you had up there, the commercial sites, and I'm familiar with every single one of them. Two were a little bit surprising to me. The one on East Avenue, which has been a winery off, it's really a house. Yeah. Okay. There wasn't any, I say, I'm focused on the ones where investment was actually added to, built up. And there's three of them, what is now Las Positas and was called Deer Ridge, I think. It was called Deer Ridge originally. Dante Robert and what is, I'm sorry, on Arroyo, the Danny Niggs property. I'm trying to remember. Anyway, but like the Caldera house, I was like, wow, that's a commercial site. I mean, we rented that for my son's wedding for the bride and the bridal party to get dressed in. I didn't even realize it was a commercial property. I just thought it was a house. But my point is, all the other sites have issues with them. I mean, we hope to have bed and breakfast. We hope to have retail sites. I mean, one hotel was approved. I have no idea if it's ever going to be built. I mean, I know it went through a CEQA process and a challenge and stuff. But my point is, they're either too small, not located properly, but it's not attracting the capital that's required in order to build a market where you have a lot of great little wineries close by where people can walk or ride, and which was, I think, what was envisioned. And maybe that vision just wasn't valid at the time. Maybe it's not valid now. I don't know. But like I said, I'm just hoping that this study is read and digested, and some time and commitment is made to address what you point out. And that's kind of my comments. Sorry, I didn't want to be negative. I am being negative, but I do know what I'm close to it. I'm on the Tri-Valley Conservancy Board also. We're very concerned about this. And this, basically buttresses what we've been trying to tell you is there's a problem. Please help.
Okay, good feedback. Any other comments? Anybody, alternate member Tam or member Miley? Okay,
If I could, I just want to echo what
Sure.
Splend said. Not only hope to, we have to see bed and breakfasts, hotels, places to stay, agritourism. We have to see vines continue to be replanted, added to. We're half the acres of under vine that we feel we need to be. And failure is not an option. So we have to encourage this to happen.
do you have, either of you have any suggestions on how that could happen? I mean, we have a.
Sewer
you've
line
got a
is the big
report.
one. Right now, it's Godspeed to the sewer line. I know this isn't LAFCO's lane, but the city of Livermore is breaking their necks, figuring this out with their engineers, talking about what it's going to cost, how to best do it. My staff is working with them weekly or monthly to make sure that it happens. When it comes to hooking into the sewer line, we're going to try to find ways to incentivize and provide the carrot, so to speak, so that people will hook into it once it's economically viable to process grape water. Again, we should see an increase in grapes being produced. As far as the hotel, one hotel being approved, not sure if it's going to get built. We are trying to make sure that it does. So, yeah.
And my goal, when I think I was only suggested, and it was Chair Ann Wieskamp at the time, I believe, seconded it, is to give a foundation for the county and the cities and wine growers and the TVC to say, okay, finally we had this retrospective. It showed things, how they changed or how they didn't happen, and say, okay, maybe we need to revisit this. Maybe we need to take we need to take a look at this again and see what we didn't do correctly and how we can fix it, or how things change and how we can address them. That's what my hope of the end result of this study. I mean, that's my hope.
Did you feel that you received that today? Not yet.
Bob is going to answer for me.
All right, Commissioner
No,
Warner.
I would just say is that, I agree with what you guys said, that the value of this report is sort of uncovering what the structural issues are that have prevented the growth that was envisioned. I think many of them are being addressed, and, this is a very valuable tool for going there. I mean, when we talk about other factors of why precluding the development, right now we've got the what's happened to the hotel industry, say with COVID and everything else. We've got the interest rates. So there are a number of factors that we don't have control over that are going to drive this, but I think it's incumbent upon LAFCO and the other governing bodies to just make sure that all the enablers are there. And I think that's the point of this report, is uncovering what needs to be done. But I think there's an agreement amongst the governing bodies that we want to make this happen. And then we have the NIMBYs and their lawsuits that take advantage of whatever they can, but they eventually they'll get resolved.
Okay, all right, that. Do we have any public speak?
No public speak.
We have close public comment.
Excuse me, Chair Brown, I see one member from the public trying to speak. Just raised his hand.
Okay, let's do it.
Mr. Abreu, you have 3 minutes to speak.
Thank you. Yeah, my hand got raised right after, do we have any members, and no members of the public. Right in between there, that gap space of time was when my hand got raised. Now, yeah, this report, I really think it's a little bit too much relies on the theoretical side. And I've been writing into your commission, but obviously, you don't pay much attention to individual comments from individual Alameda County residents. I've been pointing to the Landsat, satellite imagery. It's the kind of thing that, the Lawrence Livermore National Labs would use if they wanted to take measurements. They would use optical space-based imagery to look at what the utilization is of the land and assess the ground truth, as they say. And what you see there is, especially with respect to the city of Livermore, you see pretty good success in terms of the South Livermore Area Plan and in terms of Measure D, that the Livermore urban area in the last 20 years or so, since during the Measure D period, since 2000, it stayed steady. It did not expand very much. And you can see that the Livermore urban, pavement is not growing out in every direction. It's very, so in that respect, Measure D was a huge success. And the South Livermore Area Plan has got lots of the land that was, non-urbanized. It's still there and it's still non-urbanized. Now, at present, it is 3,000 acres. Let's just use, I'll take that number and accept it. Now, what are we comparing it to? Well, we just heard the consultants say we should compare it to a long-term goal, which is a number on the piece of paper, which was a political number, which was 5,000 acres. But that's not a real actual area of land. That's a number on a piece of paper. I would suggest that you go back to Landsat, go back to the year 2000 or 2001, or 1999, whenever, and look at how much acreage was back then. And if you do that, which I did that, you find less than, I would say probably less than 2,000 acres back then. You see less. It's noticeably less acreage on the satellite imagery. And so instead of saying that we flagellating ourselves, woe is me, because we haven't achieved this 5,000 acres, the number on the paper, I'd say that the South Livermore Valley Area Plan and the Measure D can pat themselves on the back, put away the chains, put away the nails, and pat yourselves on the back for going from 2,000 acres to 3,000 acres. Thank you.
All right, thank you, sir. Did anybody happen to get in under the cutoff line again? Nope. That's
No other
comment.
speakers, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to bring it back to our commission. They are asking for an accepting, and that is a motion to approve the final report of the Alameda County LAFCO South Livermore Valley. Do I have a motion?
If I may, be so
Certainly,
inclined,
please.
since I started this ball rolling, I'll move approval.
Second.
All right, motion made and seconded. Because we have some at remote, could we please do a roll call?
Yes. Chair Brown,
Yes.
Commissioner Faria,
Yes.
Commissioner Hobart,
Aye.
Commissioner Hernandez,
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson,
Aye.
Commissioner Miley,
Yes.
Commissioner Splendorio.
Yes.
Let the record reflect the motion passes.
Okay, terrific, thank you. And our next agenda item is a final report and Alameda County's LAFCO initial feasibility analysis. Staff.
Again, this was an item that was presented in July, and we had a draft report on that. We extended a 30-day public review and comment period. We did receive I would say a lot of comments to extend that public comment period. So I believe it was August 29th, we extended that comment period until September 11th. Staff went around to all the municipal advisory committees and presented the draft report for comments and feedback, as well as the Castro Valley Rotary. And the public draft was posted, I believe it was the Castro Valley Forum, it was the Daily Review, and Castro Valley News, and other press releases for the East Bay Times. And working with the consultant, Richard Bergson, he's here today to provide a presentation to the commission on what was incorporated. Generally, I would let big thanks to Richard Bergson. He incorporated a lot of the feedback that we received for this report. And we're here today to kind of highlight this new information. And Richard, if you are ready.
Thank you, Rachel. I'm glad to be back in presenting this revised report.
I'm so sorry. There's a technical issue. So let's see. Here we go. There we go.
Oh, wait, that's the old one.
Oh, it is.
I think you had the correct one. Yeah.
It's more me. You would have married me yesterday, you know, 1,000 times over.
Excuse the technical difficulties right now. Unfortunately, we had a older version of the report, so we're just trying to get you the correct copy. So if you can give us 5 minutes and maybe take an intermission, and then we can come
Okay.
back.
All right, we're going to take a brief intermission or a brief break, and we'll be right back.
All right. Thank you. My apologies for the delay. All right, Richard Bergson here, and I'm glad to be back presenting the revised report that I presented to you a few months ago. As Rachel mentioned, we did, following the circulation of the draft report, LAFCO, Rachel made a number of presentations. We also received quite a few comments. I just quickly added them up. There were about 50 or so. And I did address, I think, virtually all of those comments, both through revisions to the report, additional research, analysis, and expanded text. So what you have is the revised IFA. I also prepared several pages that respond to each comment. And also, I was asked to put together some frequently asked questions, which I provided to Rachel that kind of boiled down, I think, some of the key points. So for people who don't perhaps have the time to read a detailed technical report, hopefully that will be a more accessible way to understand the findings of the report. So a few of the key changes. We deleted the Fairview plus Eden boundary. It was pointed out, of course, at the last presentation, those areas aren't contiguous and they couldn't be combined into a city. And instead we created separate budgets or analysis of Eden separately from Fairview. We also talked briefly about the Canyonlands area. And while our analysis focused on the county's urban planning areas, there's absolutely nothing to preclude revisions to those boundaries. And I did look at the Canyonlands economics. I think depending on how much exactly what areas were added, I don't think it would have a significant financial impact on a proposed boundary and the financial analysis of that boundary. I would encourage any resident of that area who's motivated to become part of a city to engage with proponents of any Castro Valley incorporation to be sure that their community is part of a larger city if that's what they wish. Also, as you know, following an application to LAFCO, it's within LAFCO's purview to define boundaries or boundary alternatives and have those analyzed as well. The report includes additional data that was requested about approximate staffing and staff costs, number of full-time equivalents, and salary information. So it does include some of that information as well. I did look at some additional city budgets, and there are changes to the numbers in the report. Another important factor is that I highlighted another source of potential revenues that wasn't really addressed in the first report, and that would be the revenues that the CSA collects and accounts for. Those revenues come from the state. They're basically public safety sales tax and the share that the county gets, and that goes towards supporting sheriff's services to the unincorporated areas. And that potentially is a source of revenue, but it's going to require obviously discussions with the county. Potentially legislation could change how that revenue is allocated. But that would make a big difference to the feasibility of incorporation. Just a reminder, here again is the map of the communities that are part of the analysis. And again, a table of the boundary characteristics, which has been split up slightly differently, but the numbers are the same as the prior report. No significant change to the prior findings. I did say that some of the specific numbers did change somewhat as a result of additional review and analysis. The feasibility still requires additional revenues. The IFA did not assume new taxes. Again, property tax in lieu of vehicle license fees is one potential source that would require legislation. And I mentioned last time there have been efforts to restore that to new cities, but so far none of those efforts have been successful. And then revenues from the CSA, which potentially could support sheriff's services to a new city. Although again, that's going to require either legislation and or negotiation with the county over the use of those revenues for services to a new city. This table is also in the report. This shows revenues and expenditures projected for a potential new community. And again, all scenarios are negative, although if you look at below the line, potential police CSA revenues, those could bring a city to near break even, or in the case of a combined large city, Castro Valley, Eden, and Fairview, off to the far right in that column, if all of the current CSA revenues went towards services to the new city, there would be a surplus. And then of course, hopefully at some point, the property tax in lieu of VLF revenues will be restored to new cities, and that will also make a big difference to feasibility. Again, there will be an impact on the county, except in the case of Fairview, because of the relatively lower values, smaller commercial base, fewer revenues that the county would shift compared to the costs that the county would save if Fairview became its own city. But it doesn't appear that Fairview alone could be viable. I apologize for the small print. I'll just make the point that this is a new table that was added. It was requested to be included, and you'll see the table as table 12 in the latest report. Basically, what it says, the block of numbers at the top are revenues that are currently generated to help pay for county services, municipal services to the area. The middle block shows revenues that are shifted to a new city. And then at the bottom are the revenues that remain with the county. And of course, the key again is that property tax in lieu of VLF is not shifted, and the CSA revenues are not shifted. And those are the zeros that you see in that middle block. The block at the bottom again is the revenues that the county is left with. And again, they're also left with some property tax because not all of that is shifted. As I talked about last time, there's a statutory formula that determines how much property tax revenue is shifted from the county to the new city. Next steps are basically the same as the prior report, although I've added in discussions with the county, which would occur in any event, but that's particularly if CSA revenues are to be considered as a source of revenue to help fund a contract with the sheriff to the new city. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions or take any comments or turn it over to Rachel at this point.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? Yes, Commissioner Miley.
No, thank you, Chair. Richard, in looking at the report, the Eden area, which would be Ashland, Cherryland, Hayward Acres, and San Lorenzo, that potentially could be a city, but it's kind of the financial feasibility would be dependent on this additional revenue.
Correct. And that's true of all of the combinations.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And as I mentioned, the combination of all those communities, I think, represents the most feasible, the most cost-effective scenario because of the economies of scale and also the greatest total revenue.
And when you say the combination, are you saying Castro Valley, Eden, and Fairview?
Correct.
Now, what about if it's just Castro Valley and Eden?
There with me a moment.
Page 3 of their report.
Castro Valley and Eden, if you look at the net and add that together, it's a total shortfall of about 24 million. If they were able to get the police CSA revenues, those are about 22 million. So on that basis, you're still a bit short, but you are getting much closer.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Because I don't think that there's a desire for Castro Valley and Eden as one jurisdiction, but I was just curious about that. Now in Eden, what happens if San Lorenzo were pulled out?
Well, that's a good question. I didn't go down to that level of detail.
Okay. No problem. Because I don't know.
Are in the report for the most part. We do have the revenues for the individual communities to the extent they're available.
Yeah, because I don't know if there's a lot of appetite there as well. And then in terms of the next steps, deciding on what we do here today, theoretically, we would just be waiting for an application for incorporation from a person or an entity to pursue any of these combinations?
Yes, that's correct. That would be my understanding.
And then that application, the party or party submitting an application, Rachel, do we have a sense of the fee associated with that? Or would that be depending on what the application would be asking?
So generally for an incorporation proposal, I believe based on our application fee schedule, that is around, I want to say $25,000. And I am double checking that right now. But we would also have a consultant to do the comprehensive fiscal analysis. So that would most likely be, I'll let Richard kind of provide an estimate on that one.
Well, the recent Mountain House Incorporation, at least the first round of the CFA, I think the budget was around $130,000 for the consultant to do the CFA. They had to go through a second round, so the total costs were greater, but that's potentially the magnitude of cost. But
I'll add, given that we have, this data, it shouldn't be as high. And I would hope we could shave at least, $10,000, 10 to 20 off of that, given that we already have this initial feasibility analysis. And then just to reiterate, I did check for our incorporation application, our fee is $25,000.
Okay. Yeah, I know. I've said before, when Castro Valley sought incorporation in the early 2000s, I covered the cost of the analysis and the fee, which was at that time about $100,000 total. So now what we're talking about with the fee and the analysis, it could be upwards of it could range anywhere from maybe 130 to 150,000 or thereabouts. So I just wanted to kind of get a sense out there for the public, depending on who would want to pursue any of these potential scenarios. And then just for the record, I want to make it clear that the process then would be the comprehensive feasibility analysis would be conducted. Then LAFCO would determine whether or not incorporation were feasible.
yes, that's correct. Based on the information in the comprehensive fiscal analysis, they would make that determination among others.
Okay. And then LAFCO would vote to put this on the ballot. Then the citizens of the proposed city would then have the opportunity to vote yea or nay.
Correct. And it require a 50% plus one positive vote.
Okay. All right. So I just wanted to kind of get a sense of that. Well, I just want to say, appreciate the work that was been done here. As I said before, having this information is better than not having it, because we've never had a preliminary feasibility analysis done since I've been an elected official and on LAFCO. So having this information, I think for LAFCO has been beneficial as well as for the public. I do think incorporation is something worthy of pursuit, because having represented the area for 20 plus years, I do think the ability to provide better local control and decision-making would be served through incorporation. But once again, I don't know if there's we need to do the comprehensive feasibility analysis, but furthermore, getting beyond that, I don't know what the level of support for incorporation is, depending on what application, if at all any, would be submitted to us. But I do appreciate this information, and then I guess we'll just wait and see whether or not we get an application. So thank you.
Interesting, very interesting. Yes.
So Richard, I'm glad you've included the possible revenue source from the sheriff. But, it begs the question, a number of the public meetings I've attended about this issue, people are in Castro Valley, at least, are very satisfied with the services they get from the sheriff. In fact, as they say, it's better service than they get in Hayward or San Leandro or other cities. So what would be the reason to say like a new city like Castro Valley? Why would they have to have their own police department? Couldn't they still be served by the sheriff?
Yes, that would be the primary choice, I think, in this case, is a contract with the sheriff. So and that's an assumption in the report that there would be continued contract services with the sheriff, and forming their own department would be an option, but very few cities, new cities, do that right off the bat.
Okay. And then the other issue would be Supervisor Miley raised the issue of the cost for the more detailed fiscal analysis. And I believe there's a possibility that there's a state loan that we could get that would finance that. Is that correct?
That's true, and it's in the state statutes. I know that when East Los Angeles attempted to incorporate, I think they received $50,000 as a loan, and they didn't make it through the LAFCO process because it wasn't feasible. I don't think anybody had to repay that loan, but if they're successful, I think the loan would have been repaid by the new city.
So there aren't very many people who actually done that.
I don't think so. No.
Okay. I heard somebody comment to say, well, don't wait for the state to give you any money.
Oh, well, it is in the statute, so there is a process. It's not just asking them for money, but yeah, nothing would be easy about it, I'm sure.
Good, thank you.
All right, Commissioner Von Heet. I'm going to say this out. Von Heeter Leopold, sorry. Just call you Georgie.
I just wanted to add to Ralph's, here we are 40 years later and we still contract with the Sheriff's Department. And Melissa can address this. We have a lot of local control that we've written into the contract over those 40 years, but it's still the county sheriff who is our police department.
Okay.
And our police officers are hand-selected for the city of Dublin, so we get the best of the best.
So the rest of you guys, sorry. Any other comments? Okay, I had just a couple of questions. I appreciated the questions that Nate Miley asked because that helped me to understand. But could it be, if this moves forward, it sounds like an organization or a group of residents need to come forward to make the application. It can't be supported through the county or through LAFCO. It comes through the residents. Is that right?
Well, there are two ways that it can be initiated. One is by a petition of registered voters, and the other method is by resolution of an agency such as Mountain House Community Services District, basically applied to LAFCO. So now I don't know about the county.
I believe the county would still be able to do that, but I mean, I haven't seen that happen. I believe a county, a city, or a special district and any agency that has territory within the incorporation area would be able to provide an application to LAFCO through a resolution of application.
Okay, that's possible. It would set up a situation where I suppose the county would negotiate with themselves over revenue neutrality, but.
Okay, all right. So I looked like in 2002, they put a TOT tax on the ballot to help offset the costs. Did the TOT tax fail as well as, I know the incorporation failed like 72% or 71% said no?
I believe it was on the same ballot measure because incorporation was contingent on approval of that 10% TOT. So I don't think that the TOT was approved at that time, but you probably know it was subsequently approved at some point. There is now a TOT.
Oh, I did not know that. Okay, thank you.
I don't, a countywide or unincorporated area TOT. So no, it must not have been approved or become effective as a result of that particular ballot measure, especially since the proposed city failed.
Okay, thank you. And then if this goes to the ballot, who pays for the cost of putting it on the ballot, which can be significant?
I believe the county pays for it, and then if the new city is successful, they repay the county.
All right. And then I know even when we look at the islands within the city of Pleasanton, there needs to be kind of a phasing in. So if it's on your property taxes, some sort of, if it's not TOT tax and instead on your property tax, it would make sense to me that you're investing in a few years and then you'll incorporate, let's say in 5 years. Has that been discussed as far as you know, because of these additional delta and expenses, like chart 2 or table 2 showed an $18 million for the 3 cities, a shortfall. So many of your numbers have shifted just a little bit, but there's a significant shortfall. And the idea commonly is those who use pay for it. So if it was on a property tax, then it was a reasonable amount that could be accumulated for a one day, let's say 5 years from that point. You've got the funds you need and you could do the incorporation. Is that unusual to happen in that manner?
Well, I think maybe that's perhaps another variation of adopting a tax like a TOT. That could be adopted before the incorporation happens, of course, and then the new city would inherit that TOT tax, which would help their budget, of course. Although if it happens before incorporation, then incorporation has an impact, a greater impact on the county because the county was using those revenues. So unless the county had dedicated that revenue to the incorporated area, in which case, yeah, it just.
It has to go into a dedicated fund. It doesn't go into the general fund of the county. Absolutely.
Right. And the concept also, I think, applies in the case of Mountain House, which when it was formed, it was adopted, they adopted a number of special taxes, which I think currently amount to maybe $2,000 per homeowner at this point, which without those special taxes, it would not be feasible as a city. So that's what makes Mountain House unique. But that's another variation, I think, of what you're saying, that, you know, taxes in advance of incorporation could make incorporation more feasible.
Right, accumulated to make it feasible at some future date.
Right.
Okay, and sorry, I had one more question. Is there a bandwidth, just curious, maybe the supervisor knows, a bandwidth so that there is room for a sales tax, for example, on this residential area? Sometimes sales tax pull better than property tax bonds.
Right. I believe that there is a 2% cumulative cap on sales taxes within a given local area. So there are limits and some nuances to that. But basically, if other agencies have already, consumed that capacity, then it does limit the. But if not, that could be an option.
Okay, just thinking all the options that are possible. Okay, any other questions before I go to the public? All right, do we have anyone from the public that would like to speak?
We do, Chair. Mr. Frank Mellon? Yes, sir. You have 3 minutes to speak.
Thank you. I have 2 issues. One is totally related to Mr. Johnson. I think he needs to be recused from this process because he is on the Castro Valley Cityhood Committee. He is prominently displayed there. And as such, casting a vote towards proceeding further taints the process because he has a distinct bias. He wants cityhood. That's fine. I don't want cityhood. I acknowledge it. That's fine too. But to be in a position that you all are in, and then voting in favor of having something proceed forward, in effect, puts all of you as being politically inclined towards cityhood. That's what I learned when I was on the East Bay Med Board. If you have one member of a group that has a particular bias, the entire group is thereby tainted. And I suggest you, Ralph, I know you, I've dealt with you, but this is business. And this business should be what LAFCO is supposed to be, unbiased. The gentleman has done a fine job of presentation. What disturbs me is that the numbers that are coming up are higher than we saw back in July. The debt is greater. It's not getting less. there's more talk of taxes. You all have a fiduciary responsibility to the county and the people in the unincorporated county. And as such, having something go forward when the numbers are getting worse is violating your fiduciary responsibility to those citizens. Now, I understand that it can be put to a vote, and this is only accepting a report, but you're accepting a report that is increasingly becoming deficit. As a resident of Castro Valley for 40 some odd years, I have to say, that disturbs me. When I was on the East Bay Mud Board, we looked to having balanced budgets. This is saying you're going to have to borrow some money. And final note, the cost of an election, $4 to $6 per vote cast. And last ballot, I asked my friends at the East Bay Mud Board, because I didn't get elected. I retired by choice. I wasn't indicted. I wasn't scandaled. But it cost them $5 a head for the last election. That is a price that has to be borne by the new city. The county can't pick that up because the county isn't voting for it. So I suggest to you, I thank you for your time, but going forward to this really requires local hearings and more knowledge for the Castro Valley residents. Thank you for your time. I will answer any questions if you have any.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you.
So
Did you want to respond?
I did anticipate Mr. Mellon's question about my participation in this. I asked county council to give me an opinion, and I think he has. Andrew?
Yes, ultimately, a decision on a conflict concerns facts personal to you, Commissioner Johnson, and you would need to decide whether you need to recuse yourself. But given the nature of today's action, which is merely to direct the consultant whether to continue work on the report or to conclude the report, and in the case the recommendation is adopted to conclude the report and then to file it within LAFCO's records, it seems unlikely there would be a conflict that would affect the commission's ability to take action today. The speaker described the action as moving the process forward on incorporation. That is not the nature of the action today. It's merely to accept an independent report. Whether incorporation moves forward is a function of whether a petition is submitted or an action is taken by a public agency that has the ability to do so. Obviously, all this is based on the action that is proposed and recommended by the staff today. If incorporation moves forward, you would need to consider the facts and circumstances of your involvement in any advocacy group at that time, and the nature of the actions before the commission in the future.
Thank you.
I would respectfully request that my protest be noted in the minutes of today's meeting.
So noted. Okay.
Thank you so much.
So much. And our next speaker?
We have one more speaker online, Mr. Abreu. You have 3 minutes to speak.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'd like to, if there's a commission member like Commissioner Johnson and anybody who is coming in from inside Castro Valley with a vote or with an opinion or whatever about this Castro Valley thing, I have no problem with that, with these insiders having opinions. I recall that on the East Bay Mud Board, now I was never on the board, but I heard from some member of the board telling me that they didn't want to hear from outsiders outside the East Bay Mud District. And of course they're getting all their water from the Macaulay River or from the Delta. They're getting water from way outside their district, and they don't want to hear from these outsiders. So that was very strange today to hear that they're complaining about insiders now, insider voting, insider opinions in Castro Valley. I welcome them. By the way, I don't live in Castro Valley or Eden or wherever. I do live in the county, but that's it. Also, all of this is based on the state. Did you hear about all this stuff about sales taxes, about vehicle license fees, about all these different ways of moving tax revenues and going through the state to collect the fees and pass them back to the city or a proposed city. Well, you know, it all sounds great in theory, but if any of you read the San Jose Mercury lately, like yesterday, you might notice that the headline, which in the story, it said Fremont celebrated as sales tax revenue ballooned by $37 million. Now the state wants it back. And here's the subheadline. An accounting blunder gave the city a financial windfall, but should they have known it was a mistake? Question mark. You know, I think that the LAFCO should be looking into the finance departments of all these cities, including Fremont, and asking whether they're actually running their books correctly. Like, for example, when they publish financial reports, and they're told by the state to subtract off $30 million or whatever it is, did they subtract it off from their financial report? Or are they just kind of mumbling the numbers verbally and not really putting it into the financial reports? This financial stuff that we're talking about today is actually, I've learned by reading the newspaper, it's very complicated. And the state, you can't even rely on them very much because it took them, I don't know how long, many months, 6 months, whatever it was, before they started looking into these problems and finding that the $37 million was in Fremont's bank account. Now, you know where that money came from. It didn't come from a large manufacturer of automobiles or wherever. They paid it to the state. The state should have given it to other cities across California or across the county. I don't know who. But so some of you may be in those cities. So this city, thanks to the mishandling of the state.
Mr. Abreu, your time is up, sir. Thank you.
Is that our last speaker?
That is our last speaker, Chair.
Close the public comment period. Any comments, thoughts, moving forward? I know this is a great report, but I just want to do something with it. I just feel a lot of effort was done, and to sit here and just file it is frustrating. So it's to me personally. Anybody want to start?
Well, Chair.
Yes, please.
Well, the staff recommendation is that we proceed with alternative action number 1, which would be basically to have us accept the report. And
wow,
that's it. Accept the report. I mean, we did this report and we paid for this report because we had extra funds in our resources to pay for this. In the past, we haven't done this. I don't know what more we'd want to do. I don't think LAFCO wants to pursue an effort around incorporation. I think we should leave that up to the citizens of the respective jurisdictions to decide if they want to pursue incorporation or as council's pointed out, an agency that can file a petition for incorporation. So I think the staff recommendation for alternative action 1 is the appropriate way to proceed. And if you
that a motion?
A motion, I'll make a motion.
I would appreciate it. That, yeah, under the minutes, the agenda, it says formally accept and file the final report. So that word file was sort of catching my eye. So I have a motion made. Do you have a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, we've got a motion made, a second. And I'm remiss because I meant to ask our executive director, you did outreach. What did you hear in your outreach? So you went to different locations, rotaries, different, what's a general thermometer of how the residents are feeling?
Great question, Chair. I believe overall, most of the public was hesitant to any form of incorporation proposal. But I think with more information, depending on some of the MACs, I believe it was mostly the Eden Municipal Advisory Committee. They seemed very interested with the information that we provided. And knowing that not necessarily property tax or any taxes would change, that motivated, they seem motivated or interested if they were able to receive part of that PTVLF not necessarily, perhaps with an incorporation process. I think overall it was, a mixed consensus. I did receive a lot of emails for no to cityhood, but that was specifically for Castro Valley area. But I think if the public knowing that taxes would not necessarily have to be increased for incorporation to move forward, they would have been interested. But I think overall it was a little hesitant, and especially there was some concerns about LAFCO being able to submit their own incorporation proposal, which is not possible or legally allowed.
Okay, great, thank you.
Sorry.
Yes, would you like to
Add a
comment?
little bit to Rachel's comments, the one thing that was nice about the report is that it actually presented a lot of facts that to the citizens in the unincorporated community really weren't aware of. And I know you're concerned about just filing it, but I think the fact that the report has been done and very objectively and very factual, I think it stimulated a lot of interest in the unincorporated community about incorporation. And we, I don't think it's going to end here today.
Okay,
So
that's good to know. All right, we have a motion made and seconded. Can we take a vote? Roll call, please.
Yes, Chair. Chair Brown,
Yes.
Commissioner Faria,
Yes.
Commissioner Hobart, absent. Commissioner Hernandez,
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson,
aye.
Commissioner Miley,
Aye.
Commissioner Splendorio.
Aye.
Let the record reflect the motion passes.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, our last agenda item before executive officer report is matters initiated. I did hear a matter initiated. Would you like to clarify presentation for EMS services, or is that something you wanted to do under matters initiated?
Yeah.
Either one of you?
Yeah, I think that would be an appropriate presentation to have us hear from the EMS folks about exactly the breadth and scope of their work. And it could possibly lead to an MSR. It is a county service area, so I think there's appropriately that we could do that.
Yep. Okay, can we have an executive officer report, please?
Thank you, Chair. Just to provide a summary, the LAFCO executive officer, me, is due for a performance review. So I will follow up with the commission probably within the next 2 weeks to outline the procedures to perform and follow my performance review. And hopefully we can have that done by our January meeting.
Okay. Does that normally go through finance and policies, or does it go to the whole board at the same time?
It will go to the whole commission.
Okay,
Yes.
terrific. Thank you. Any other? I know we have some informational items as well.
Just overall, I believe the commission will receive a application from the city of Livermore regarding the Oak Park business improvement. It's an annexation area for industrial uses. I believe we'll receive something probably early next year. I also provided a legislative update, not to get into it too much, but AB 399 was passed, and that pretty much kind of, I don't want to say, for lack of a better word, the San Diego County Water Agency, the residents in another district voted to detach from that agency, and legislation was passed for the entire affected territory to have to vote on that. That is just particular to the San Diego County. It won't be affected for Alameda County, but that was something to note in that update.
Okay, thank you. And is there a report on the annual conference for those who went? Yes.
Well, I'll start. Was a very good conference this year. We went to the Old Hyatt, which is up on the hill by the golf course, which was great to see after all these years. I have not been there since the early days of the League of California Cities when I went in the 80s. and they've done a lot of improvements. It was very good service. The food, of course, was, you know, typical chicken, but you could have salmon too, being a beef eater. But the conference had great sessions. I attended one that had to do with extended services outside of our area, our jurisdictional boundaries. And the fact is that Government Code 56133, which talks about the fact that if you want any kind of a service, you're supposed to go through LAFCO, and the fact that many places, as we have some in our area, that just ignore it. It is still state law. They still expect everybody to comply with it. But the suggestion from the speaker was that we think about sponsoring legislation that would include fines that we could impose. And maybe even with MSRs, maybe that would wake up the agencies that are not paying attention to the fact that we're required to do these things and they're required to respond. So that was great. The other one that I really found interesting was Paradise, how to respond after an emergency. And the gentleman from Paradise was there, and all the things they had to take into account that they hadn't considered. And of course, they had ignored the county early on about the dangers of the city, because nobody prior to all of these fires in the last 3 years ever thought you'd wipe out a whole town. And they wiped out everything, as we know. And so it was real interesting to hear him talk about what they started with. Ironically, they started with sewer service because they lost a lot of their sewer lines. So anyway, I truly enjoyed it. It was very, very informative.
Very excellent.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I think one of the recurring themes that I saw in the conference was municipal service reviews in the 21st century. And kind of what they were getting at, I think if you look back at the fire report, she listed all the things that an MSR should include. But apparently the laws that governs MSRs gives us quite a broad range of things and topics that we can include. And you know, the idea that you might want to be more proactive with your MSRs, working more closely with the cities and special districts would be very helpful. I think 2 examples of our LAFCO, the wastewater study that we're doing is an example of that, as well as the incorporation study, things that we're kind of going out of our normal MSR bandwidth to do. So I thought that was good.
Okay. Any comments from staff? No? Okay, terrific. All right. Well, our next meeting will be January 11th, and I may not be there, so I'll confirm with you.
Okay.
And are we going to have an agenda of all the future meetings, or shall I just go down the calendar? Is there any months we miss?
No. And I believe at our September meeting, we had the meeting calendar date.
Okay, I'll have to go
But
back.
I'll just make sure, I'll follow back with the commission to make
you
sure
mind?
you all received a meeting invitation.
Thank you. Just if you don't mind sending that out. Okay, with that, this meeting's adjourned.